From the AFRTS News Center in Washington, this is a News Center Extra. I'm Warren Lee. Earlier this month, President Bush determined that 6 enemy combatants currently detained by the United States are subject to his military order of November 2001. Well, that means that if tried, these enemy combatants will be tried by military commissions conducted by the U.S. Armed Forces. Not long ago, I was able to spend a fascinating half hour with 2 men who are at the center of these proceedings. Air Force Colonel Will Gunn is an experienced military lawyer who is now the acting Chief Defense Counsel. Army Colonel Fred Bork is the Office of Military Commissions acting Chief Prosecutor. These proceedings are usually referred to in the media as military tribunals, but the Defense Department always calls them commissions. Since lawyers usually choose their words very carefully, I began by asking them the difference between the 2 terms.
I think I would probably look at it as commissions are a subset. I would say that tribunals would include military courts-martials, inquiries, courts of inquiry, and military commissions. So I think you have to think of tribunals as the overarching category and military commissions as a subset. So, agreed?
I agree.
Yeah. So, all right. I think that's probably right.
Can you walk us through the steps of the process that is going to take place with these defendants? And it might be helpful if you could frame it against the military references that we're generally used to, where it begins with referral of charges in an Article 31 hearing and proceeds on through. Can you walk us through the steps of what's going to happen?
On November the 13th, 2001, President Bush signed his military order, and that military order provides that non-U.S. citizens who were associated with Al-Qaeda or otherwise involved in terrorism, if there's a reason to believe that they've done these things, they are subject to the military order. So that brings us to the first step, which actually happened on July the 3rd, and that was when President Bush said there's 6 individuals now in Department of Defense custody where there's a reason to believe that they are have committed these acts and therefore are subject to the military commission process. So that's really the beginning. We refer to these reason to believe determinations, our shorthand is RTBs, and you'll probably end up hearing that more as we go through. So that's where the process starts. That gives us the green light to, in my office as the acting chief prosecutor, to draft charges. Once we've drafted commission charges for war crimes, which include conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful attacks on civilian objects, torture, any of these sort of war crimes offenses, because that is only what military commissions are really about, is prosecuting war crimes. Those charges have to be approved by the appointing authority, at this point Dr. Wolfowitz, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and if and when Dr. Wolfowitz approves those charges, then we'd start the commission proceedings. When the charges are approved, that's when Colonel Gunn, as the acting Chief Defense Counsel, is most likely to get involved with detailing defense counsel. We'll set up a time for the military commission process to start. There'll be a panel or a jury of between 3 and 7 military officers, and they will hear the case. And I feel fairly comfortable in saying that once the presiding officer says the commission is called to order, it'll look very similar to a court-martial, with the government making an opening statement, defense making an opening statement, presenting evidence, just like we see at the normal court-martial, all the way through sentencing.
I think one thing that is a bit different from the normal court-martial, though, is that when you're actually before a military commission, rather than having a judge and court-martial members or a jury, as we're used to, the panel will consist of the 3 to 7 officers that Colonel Bork mentioned, but all of those officers will have the opportunity to vote on findings on whether or not an individual is guilty or not guilty of the charged offenses, And if an individual is found to be guilty, all of them will vote on the appropriate sentence for that person. So that's one thing that will look a bit different. However, there are a lot of similarities.
But there's not a judge.
The presiding officer will always be a judge advocate.
And he or she is one member of the panel.
So Colonel Gunn's exactly right. There isn't a judge, and that is a fairly significant difference. But I like to see it as, well, we're not calling that person a judge, but as a practical matter, it's going to be a trained military lawyer like either Colonel Gunn or me, and that presiding officer will make rulings on admissibility of evidence just as a judge would do at a regular trial. The difference is, as I think Colonel Gunn already said, is that presiding officer is actually part of the panel. And he does participate, or she does participate, in the actual voting process. And that is the way we have always done military commissions in the past, and that's the way we did military commissions in World War II, and not wanting to do anything new or different so much, we've looked back to history and adopted that process.
Well, that was my next question. When a member of the military is charged with something, you can go to the manual for court martials, and there's, step 1, 2, 3. You know exactly what you're doing. This has not occurred until since the 40s, at least. Are you all having to create the process as you go along?
There has been a new process created. After the President signed his initial order in November of 2001, Secretary of Defense signed what's called Military Commission Order number 1, and that was, I believe, in April of last year, 2002.
Yeah, March actually.
March
right,
of 2002.
in the springtime.
But then after that, the Department of Defense General Counsel, as well as several other individuals, played a part in the process of developing what are called military commission instructions. And I believe there are 8 of those instructions which spell out the details of how military commissions are supposed to function.
Many of us are prone to want to look back at the Nuremberg model. Does that provide a model from which you work, or are times different now?
Well, I think Nuremberg is a little bit different because Nuremberg is really the trial of high-level political leaders for waging aggressive war, crimes against humanity. I mean, here we were really focusing on policymakers. These are different. These military commissions are different. We did these sort of military commissions. We held a lot of them at Dachau, for example. And that's where American commissions heard and took evidence against Germans who had killed American prisoners of war, for example, at Malmedy. Also, number of prosecutions of concentration camp guards. And that's, I think, more akin to what we're doing. Not the Nuremberg political level kind of trial, but more the operators, really at the operational level. So we did do several thousand of these in the Pacific. In fact, the British, the Dutch, the Australians, the Chinese held military commissions, prosecuted Japanese soldiers who'd committed war crimes, and we did the same thing in Germany. And I think it's important, probably at the outset, for everyone to recognize that military commissions really are only going to be prosecuting war crimes or war crimes-related offenses. And so that's a little bit different because we don't prosecute war crimes at a courts-martial. For example, Bill Calley, famous Calley case during Vietnam, he was never prosecuted for a war crime. He was prosecuted for violating Article 118, murder under the UCMJ. So a little bit different.
You've said the panels will consist of 3 to 7 officers. How will you determine the size of that panel? Is it related perhaps to the severity of the crime where we have a summary special general court-martial?
That's totally up to the appointing authority. And as Colonel Bork mentioned, that's the Deputy Secretary of Defense at this current time. However, one thing that I'd like to point out with respect to that I think is very important, and that is that any time that there are 7 members appointed to a panel, we're in a context in which death could be, the sentence could be death for a crime that an individual is convicted of. So we're talking about an environment that is very, very serious. Now, in order for an individual to be sentenced to death, it's going to be necessary for that person for the panel to have voted unanimously to sentence for that sentence.
So is it fair to say that a panel of 7 might only be used in capital cases?
Well, no. I think it's more accurate to say, just as Colonel Gunn has, that for the death penalty to be a possible sentence, you do have to have 7.
Okay.
My preference as the acting chief prosecutor would be that all of our panels have 7 members, because that gives us the widest possible flexibility in the entire process. But I think, again, the point is, if you don't have 7, at least one punishment is off the table.
Okay. Where will these officers come from, without telegraphing, how an individual might be selected? Where and how will you go about selecting the officers to serve on these panels?
My understanding is that all of the services have had an opportunity to nominate individuals to serve as panel members, and these are officers from all types of duties, all types of occupations within the services. And again, only the presiding officers have to be judge advocates. So I believe we're going to see quite a cross-section.
Yeah, I think the panels are going to be balanced. This is under the auspices of the Department of Defense, the General Counsel for the Department of Defense, and I feel certain that they'll want a balance. Air Force, Army, Navy, Marine Corps. I think you'll see a healthy mix along those lines, and I think probably you can expect the captain, colonel, commander, lieutenant colonel level for the panel members. I'm just guessing, and I know that Colonel Gunn would second this, that if I tell you that as the acting Chief Defense Counsel and as the acting Chief Prosecutor, we're not really kept too much in the loop on picking these panels, because frankly, it's just not relevant to what we're doing. Certainly we have an interest in it, but they don't ask us what we think.
I was going to say a normal trial, but that's perhaps not a good term. When an offender is charged, you cite a particular paragraph of a law or an article of the UCMJ. There's a specific offense that this person has violated. Without identifying specific individuals, what are the crimes specifically in the source that these individuals may be charged with?
Well, that's a good question. The military commissions have jurisdiction over war crimes. What we have done in the process is to look at customary international law. For example, it's a customary international law that you don't kill prisoners of war. In fact, every single airman, every single soldier knows that if you're taken prisoner, one of your protections is you're not killed. You have combat immunity, and you're supposed to be safeguarded until the hostilities are over. But we've taken these customary war crimes and we have actually listed them and written them down in one of the military commission instructions, and the instruction is available on our website, and it's called Crimes and Elements. So murder of civilians by an unlawful belligerent, torture, killing prisoners of war, hijacking, wrongful destruction of civilian property. These are the sort of things that we have, if you will, codified. Remember that under international law, if you're a soldier, if you're an airman, sailor, marine, you're only entitled to attack military targets, and only if you have a military reason for doing so. So when a terrorist attacks a civilian population or civilian objects, that's a classic example of a violation of the law of war, and so that sort of offense would be prosecutable.
We've been told these trials will be as open as practicable, I believe was the term. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to watch them on court TV, I presume.
That is my understanding, that there are no plans to broadcast military commissions. I think when they use the terminology that the commissions will be open, They're referring to access by the press and by others who are present at the site of the commission. And with respect to that, there is a mechanism whereby individuals without the proper clearance can be excluded from the courtroom. And it's my understanding that that would be done in situations where we're talking about classified information. There are people in the courtroom that don't have the necessary clearance.
Will there be a record, audio or videotape of these that will be available at some time in the distant future when it is declassified that historians will be able to study?
I don't think right now the plan is to have a video or an audio record. We will have a written record of trial, and I guess, you know, we don't have audio or video records of courts-martial. We simply have a written record of trial that is reviewed. And we will have a written record of trial, and so those will certainly at some point be available, and there is a review process. But I think to go back to your earlier question, if I could comment, the President says in his order of November 13th, 2001, that he wanted full and fair trials. And I believe, as the acting chief prosecutor, that I'm required, therefore, to make sure that these trials are full and fair. And what that means is the media needs to be there to see the proceedings. There needs to be transparency. People need to hear the evidence. And again, I think not only did the President say he wants full and fair, but all of us as Americans want to make sure that whatever we're doing, it's the right thing to do. It's a full and fair trial. Everybody gets a fair trial. And at the end of the day, we're proud of the process. So although obviously my tasks are different from Colonel Gunn's, one of my primary tasks is make sure these proceedings are full and fair, not win cases. I'm not worried about convictions. I'm worried about doing the right thing, making sure the process is full and fair. And I think they will be open to the media unless we have to close them for very good national security reasons. But early on, all the cases that I'm looking at prosecuting, I anticipate the trials will be open and that the news media will be there.
Colonel Gunn, who will defend these individuals?
That's going to depend. However, in all cases, each individual will be defended by a military defense counsel. Right now, we have a team of attorneys from all branches of the service who will be assigned to represent individual accused persons. But then that particular detainee who is brought before a military commission will have some choices to make. He can choose to be defended by the person that I detail, or he can choose to be defended by a military counsel who is reasonably available, or he can choose to be defended by a civilian attorney, as long as that attorney is at no expense to the United States. So he has a variety of options.
Given the current national atmosphere, do you think you can mount an effective, zealous defense of these people?
Absolutely. I have no doubt with respect to that, and I think it's critical that we do so. I'm very confident about a couple of things. One, I'm very confident about the quality of military defense counsel. I've been a military defense counsel at various points in my life, and I've seen military defense counsel in battle. It's been interesting for me because there's been a lot of press attention here in the States focused on whether or not civilian counsel should get involved. Some have argued that they shouldn't get involved because of concern about various aspects of the commission rules. However, I certainly don't agree with that, but I would just say that regardless of how many civilian defense counsel get involved, the military defense counsel that are involved in this process are going to defend vigorously. They're going to zealously defend their clients, and they're going to get some very good results because they're focused and they're extremely well trained and extremely gifted individuals.
I'd like to ask you both, you're both senior officers, what in your career has really brought you to this point, has qualified you to take this role that you've taken on now?
I think that's a good question. For me, I've been a defense counsel at various points in my career. I've also prosecuted cases and have been, if anything, a generalist throughout my career. I think more than anything else, it's in the Air Force, we talk about our core values. And I know all the services have their own core values, and they're very similar. They're worded differently. For us, it's integrity first, service to others before self, and excellence in all that we do. To me, I really focus in on that first one in terms of integrity. You know, the President of the United States, President Bush, has talked about this global war on terrorism, and has talked about the fact that this is really about preserving our values. One of our primary values is the value that we believe in justice. Well, as an American fighting man, my responsibility is to uphold American values, and I'm going to do everything in my power to do exactly that. So that belief in integrity, of holding true to our values, is one thing. The second thing, service. I see this as an important service to the nation. It may not be necessarily what some would look to as the most popular thing to do, but I believe it's a very important thing to do, and I'm honored to be in that position. And in terms of excellence in all that we do, I'm going to do it to the very best of my ability, as I've tried to do throughout my career.
Colonel Bork, you've been involved in high-profile cases before. You were the prosecutor on the instructors at the Aberdeen Proving Ground a few years ago. What has brought you to this point?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to echo what Colonel Gunn said. I have also been a defense counsel. I was a defense counsel, a senior defense counsel for 2 years in Germany in the 80s. I'm a big believer in the defense function, and I will tell you that I have made it very clear to all the prosecutors that we are to have the best possible relations with the defense counsel, because what happens in Colonel Gunn's shop is going to be absolutely critical to people understanding that the process is fair. I think, I've done a couple of things. I've been lucky in my career. I've spent most of my career in criminal law, prosecuting and defending at courts martial. I had an opportunity to be an assistant U.S. attorney in North Carolina for 2 years. I prosecuted cases in federal district court. Then, as you said, in the 90s, I was sort of the chief prosecutor for the drill sergeant misconduct cases at Aberdeen Proving Ground. And what I'm doing now is, again, sort of organizing, configuring prosecution assets in something that is probably going to be very high profile. Obviously, I'm looking at Aberdeen as somewhat of a model. And then before I came here, I was a professor of international law at the Naval War College. And what we are going to be doing in this military commission process is going to have a direct impact on international law. There are a lot of international law questions. So my time as a professor of international law, I think, also gave me some of the tools to be able to put to an effective use. But only the General Counsel of the Department of Defense can truly tell you why it is that I was selected as the acting chief prosecutor. But I certainly agree with Colonel Gunn. No matter what your abilities are, if you hold fast to our core values, and the armies are really no different from the Air Forces, then I think you're going to at the end of the day, be proud of what you've done, and I think Americans are going to be proud of what we're doing.
What is the importance of these proceedings to the men and women of the U.S. military? As the 1.3, 1.4 million men and women in uniform watch these, what importance do they attach to it?
I believe these proceedings will go to how strong our system actually is. I believe that our system is extremely strong, our system of justice, the whole concept of being an American. We are tested in a way that we haven't been tested in a long, long time. And that is, right now, with these commission proceedings, we're being asked to apply justice, to be fair against individuals, in many cases, who are accused of attempting to kill Americans on a mass scale. Can we do that when we're threatened? I think that is directly analogous to what we in uniform are asked to do on a daily basis, and that is preserve our values, preserve our system. Our system will be tested. I believe our system will pass with flying colors because of the integrity of the people involved in the process.
The commissions will try people we have identified as enemy combatants. In the last few years, we have begun deploying U.S. military members around the world in greater numbers than ever before. Should U.S. service members be concerned that a foreign country might attempt to try them under similar circumstances? And what would this country do to defend them?
Well, what we're doing in the military commission process is authorized, permitted by international law. So there's absolutely nothing to preclude any other state, any other country in the world from erecting a military commission process just like ours. In fact, as I said to you earlier, the British have done military commissions, the Dutch did at the close of World War II, the Australians. So it's certainly possible. The issue, of course, is if you're going to have a military commission, then the people who appear before that military commission are going to be charged with war crimes. So the issue really for the American soldiers is, are they involved in any behavior that would constitute war crimes? Well, I think all of us know at this table that we have a great record when it comes to any sort of misconduct in combat. And what we have done in all of our past deployments, our past wars, have prosecuted Americans who have stepped over the line. I don't think there's anything for Americans to be worried about. Sure, it's always a possibility. I'm sure that the government would do whatever was the appropriate thing if an American were ever charged and brought before a military commission.
I've got to finish up with the final question that I think you all have dealt with to some extent, but let me ask it again. Do both of you believe that these defendants will get a fair trial?
The commissions are tasked with, the panel members are tasked with providing for a full and fair trial. The one thing that I have the greatest amount of confidence in is that because commission members come from the population of U.S. service people worldwide, I'm very confident that they're going to do their duty and provide for full and fair trials for each detainee that's brought before a military commission.
Every panel member is going to take an oath, and that oath is going to require them to be fair, be just, make sure the proceedings are full and fair. And for anyone who's been involved in the court-martial process, court members take this responsibility very, very seriously. There's a presumption of innocence at the military commissions. There's a requirement for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The accused has a right to remain silent. And these are all the things that court members are going to respect and make sure that those are honored. So absolutely. In fact, I would be perfectly satisfied if I were an accused at a military commission, because I trust the process and I know that the panel members will be the best that the services can select.
And there you have it, a half hour with two men at the center of the military commissions that may soon try enemy combatants currently detained by the United States. Our thanks to Colonel Fred Bork, the acting chief prosecutor, and Colonel Will Gunn, the acting chief defense counsel, for their insights into this historic process. We also want to thank the men and women of the Air Force Television Studio in the Pentagon for their hospitality and work in recording this interview in their studio. I'm Warren Lee. Thanks for joining us. This News Center Extra has come to you from the AFRTS News Center in Washington. This is the American Forces Radio and Television Service.